Greetings, programs, and welcome to the latest episode of Thumb Wars Presents Blistered Reviews. This time around, we're taking a look at the latest offering from Tecmo Koei and Team Ninja, Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z. Does this wild and woolly hack-and-slasher have the goods to take on the big boys? Or is it really just a Z-grade experience after all?
Beautiful, elegant, graceful. The ninja's blade is poetry in motion. When wielded by a master, death itself becomes art.
Well, shit. If death is an art, I'm about to create a fucking masterpiece.
I thought you were dead.
I was.
Game over.
I feel like shit.
2012's Ninja Gaiden 3 is generally agreed to represent the lowest point of the series since its revival back in 2004. The first title in the modern era to not be directed by Tomonobu Itagaki, the game simply fell flat on almost every level and was a big step down from its two vaunted and heavily remade predecessors. Following on this, NG3 got its own enhanced remake that was released in the hopes of bringing the title and the folks at Team Ninja responsible for it some redemption, but ultimately only managed to marginally at best correct NG3's failings, which left the Ninja Gaiden series itself in a precarious position and led to the title under review today, an NG spin-off titled Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z, which flips the script and places players in the role of a fallen foe of series star Ryu that has been resurrected and turned into an ultra-powerful cyborg in order to hunt down and murder the man who killed him. If only there was not that pesky army of mutated zombies in the way. The good: controls, camera, general gameplay, Ryu boss fight, visuals, audio. The bad: repetitive, weak final third, anticlimactic final boss. The ugly: the Blister Sister is wrong on every conceivable level. As previously alluded to, Ninja Gaiden Z is a gory, blood-soaked tale of revenge and madness set in a zombie-overrun Ukraine, which as a result is being invaded and bombed to the Stone Age by Russia. Awkward. Bad timing in terms of current world events aside, the game's titular lead Yaiba may be the character whose shoes players are placed in, but make no mistake, this resurrected ninja is no anti-hero. Instead, he is proudly an out-and-out villain, who throughout the game that bears his name could care less about such things as the cause of the zombie plague impeding his progress, or the motivations of the mysterious businessman who resurrected him in the first place. Instead, Yaiba is bent on one goal and one goal only: finding and getting bloody revenge on the man who literally cut him down, Ryu Hayabusa. The story of Ninja Gaiden Z, then, is a loose and self-aware affair that skirts the edge of outright parody at times, thanks in large part to a lead character that, upon getting bombarded with the kind of exposition one expects in a fantastical action thriller of this type, chooses to respond with a grunt and muttered, "Who gives a fuck?" Like in many a classic action B-movie, the story in Ninja Gaiden Z is really just there to justify, if at times only barely, all the carnage going on, and move Yaiba from one set piece to the next. And to be fair, taken on that level, it more than gets the job done. I have to admit the game even managed to inspire some genuine chuckles from me, thanks to some amusing use of zombie pantomime, and that's something I never expected to say. Fans of early Sam Raimi in particular will likely get a kick out of Ninja Gaiden Z's narrative, which very much earns its M rating for its use of gore, sex, and more as endless sources of cheap humor. In terms of gameplay, Z generally breaks down into two flavors, namely combat and platforming, with the occasional environmental puzzle or the like thrown in at times to, hopefully, keep things from getting too monotonous. Platforming in Z can come across like an extended QTE sequence at times, but generous checkpoints, some visually pleasing choreography, and a wide variety of environmental hazards helps ensure this part of the game more than earns its keep. Along similar lines, combat in Z is also fairly simple in terms of basic design, with Yaiba having three main forms of attack: his sword, his robotic rocket arm, and his lengthy chain flail. The key to combat then is successfully completing combos with one or more of these attack options so that Yaiba can trigger an execution, which will then drop health power-ups when used on regular foes, and powerful temporary weapons, literally composed of the body parts of more powerful enemies, that Yaiba will gleefully rip off of them in bloody fashion. Some enemies will have powerful attacks that come in a variety of elemental flavors, and with prudent use of blocking and a dash ability, these attacks can then be turned against foes by attentive players. Finally, players will gain experience from dispatching enemies, which can be used to purchase a wide variety of enhancements that range from new combos to reducing the effect and length of negative status effects to extending the length of time of Yaiba's Bloodlust ability, and more. Incidentally, Bloodlust is the technique which one would expect to find in a game like this that makes Yaiba invincible and extra strong for a short period of time, but requires a large number of foes be killed first before it can be activated. While combat in Ninja Gaiden Z is not particularly original, the presence of strong controls, excellent camera positioning, and a fairly constant stream of new enemy types helps ensure that winnowing the zombie hordes remains a pleasure as opposed to a chore. Well, for the first 3/4 of the game at least, but we'll get back to that later. And at last we come to the man himself, Ryu Hayabusa. For all that Yaiba's desire for revenge against him is what's driving Z's plot, ultimately the wielder of the Dragon Sword is only a supporting player at best in this game. Indeed, actual appearances from Ryu are largely limited, although you will see the aftermath of his presence throughout Z. But it's not really a spoiler to say that eventually Yaiba and Ryu do indeed meet up again, and what a showdown it is when that finally happens. Basically, the battle against Ryu constitutes a single level-long boss fight that starts big and then just keeps building and building while piling on enough epic moments and controller-destroying challenge to please even the most discerning lover of ninja action. The fight against Ryu is definitely the high point of Z, and more than lives up to the build-up across much of the game that precedes it. And if the game had simply ended after this fight, Ninja Gaiden Z would probably have been a better game for it. Unfortunately, it doesn't, and in the process, it reveals a major weakness of the game, namely that by the time the big battle with Ryu happens, Z has basically shown players all of its cards. This in turn leads the last levels of the game to consist largely of increasingly repetitive fights against larger and larger hordes of enemies made up of previously beaten mooks, mini-bosses, and even bosses. And to be sure, beating those hordes can push a player's skills to the limit, but the 5th or 6th such slog in a row without a single checkpoint or a platforming segment to break up the action can make the game start to become really wearying in a way that the earlier levels were not. Ninja Gaiden Z is a fairly repetitive game even during its best moments, but at least before the last level and boss fight, it's paced well enough to generally counteract this issue. Not so the game's last sections, and if the developers were really determined to stretch the game out further, then they should have come up with at least a couple new types of foes for players to bounce off of. And then there's the game's concluding battle, which has to be one of the biggest letdowns of a final boss fight that I've encountered in some time. Seriously, whoever thought it would be a good idea to not feature any music whatsoever during what is nominally the last climactic encounter and ultimate climax of this game deserves a hard slap to the back of the head. Both narratively and in terms of gameplay, Ninja Gaiden Z really was all about finding and challenging Ryu to another deathmatch, and as such, it's hard to escape the feeling that the developers simply ran out of steam afterwards. It's sad that what was an otherwise enjoyable, if largely mindless, hack-and-slash romp had to go out with such a wet squib of an ending, and yet for all that, I'm still glad I played Ninja Gaiden Z. Yes, the story is unapologetically juvenile and crude most of the time, but it also never takes itself too seriously either, and it's clear the developers themselves are in on the joke. This, along with gameplay that features strong controls and excellent camera layout, is enough for me to still give the game a positive recommendation. By its very nature, this is not a title that's going to appeal to everyone, and that's not even taking into account the fact that Z completely limps across the finishing line. Yet, while not an instant classic by any measure, those looking for a fun hack-and-slash experience to spend some time with could do a lot worse. And it's certainly a step up from the utterly mediocre and forgettable Ninja Gaiden 3. Ultimately, Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z is a lot like a bag of potato chips. Familiar, kind of greasy, but still filling and satisfying if that's what you're in the mood for. Score? 7 out of 10. Great. Recommendation? Try it out.